While there are many human rights issues in South Asia, the entire world is focused on what is happening today in Kashmir. We will have two panels. We have the Assistant Secretary for South Asia and the Assistant Secretary for Human Rights. The Assistant Secretary for Human Rights is making his maiden appearance as Assistant Secretary, whereas Secretary Wells has been here so often that we really ought to give her office space. As to India, on August 5th, the central government revoked Article 370, which gave autonomy to Kashmir. The origins of the Kashmir conflict are complex. I regard this as the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoint in the world. It is, after all, the only geopolitical flashpoint that has involved wars between two nuclear powers. The Indian government's decision on August 5th regarding Article 370 and Article 35A was not a direct response to these terrorist attacks, was not cleared with the United States or anyone else, and has led to great concerns for humanitarian conditions in Kashmir. I will first recognize the chair of the full committee.
Throughout this administration, my staff and I have heard far too many foreign officials express their delight that the U.S. doesn't, quote unquote, interfere in internal matters, unquote, anymore. Let me translate that from diplomatic speak into plain English. The Trump administration is giving a free pass when countries violate human rights or democratic norms. We saw this sentiment reflected in the State Department's public statements in response to India's revocation of Article 370 of its Constitution.
And I now recognize the gentleman from Florida.
We should be facilitating partners in any capacity that we're asked to. I also understand that the recent decision to abrogate Article 370 of the Indian Constitution is within the government of India's means and an internal issue. However, it is my hope that any restrictions on individuals and families in the region are removed as quickly as possible. We had somebody come in that was from Kashmir. She's a dentist at the University of Florida, and she was talking about her grandmother who was sick during this period of time. When all cell phones were cut down, the internet were cut down, she found out that her grandmother passed away through a third-party person in another country weeks later. And this is something that should not nobody should have to go through that.
Mr. Brea has made an appearance now. He's a member of our subcommittee and the full committee, and he's a recognized.
Core foundational basis of a democracy is the protection of minority rights. And I understand democracy is complicated. Again, we're managing our own democracy here. But a message in Kashmir and Jammu are equally complicated. You know, these are internal issues that we certainly want resolved. But I would, make an urgent plea to India to certainly allow journalists back in to have accurate reporting, to see what's going on the ground. I certainly, as members of Congress and others, travel to the region. Again, we want to be of assistance, and the sooner we can get back to normalization of communication and press and others being able to visit, I think it's in India's interest to do that.
Gentlelady from Pennsylvania, member of the full committee, Susan Wild.
To me, when there isn't transparency, something is being hidden, and this is what really concerns me terribly.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
I've actually served in the United States Marine Corps in Al-Anbar in the middle of an insurgency. And throughout my time, and during the height of the insurgency, I don't remember there ever being a communications blackout that was either imposed by the United States government or by the Iraqi government.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
The personal testimonies from my constituents and the media reports coming out of the region demonstrate that there is something that is going on in Kashmir that doesn't reflect the common values that we hold.
Our first witness, as has been mentioned, has been here many times. She is Acting Assistant Secretary Alice Wells. She has served as America's ambassador to Jordan and has held key posts involving South and Central Asia and Eurasia in the United States government as a career diplomat for a long time. I recognize the Assistant Secretary.
We share the concerns expressed by many members of Congress and their constituents about the manner in which Indian authorities have implemented that decision. The Department has raised its concerns with the Indian government about the continued detentions of hundreds of local residents and political leaders, including 3 former chief ministers of Jammu and Kashmir. We have urged Indian authorities to restore full access to internet and mobile phone services and to hold promised assembly elections at the earliest opportunity. The United States supports the rights of Kashmiris to peacefully protest, but condemns the actions of those who seek to use violence and fear to undermine dialogue.
We have Assistant Secretary Robert Destro, who heads the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor.
In Jammu and Kashmir, we're concerned by the detention of local political leaders and activists, as well as the internet blackout. In Assam, we are also concerned about the Government of India's final draft of the updated National Register of Citizens, or NRC, which puts 1.9 million people in Assam at risk of becoming stateless.
I will recognize the gentlelady from Washington.
It seems very difficult to see this as an economic growth move when top elected leaders, business leaders, in my case, the case with my constituent, former head of the Chamber of Commerce, and other public figures remain in detention.
Those are all valid observations, and I think that the tool that we have is suasion, and hearings like this will contribute to a powerful U.S. message on the need to move towards restoration of normalcy.
I have not seen the level of fear amongst all religions, including Hindus and other religious minorities, about what is happening in India.
We'll be continually raising them, and I might add, in addition, trying to get into those local networks so that we can validate those reports.
I just hope we will make a very strong statement about these detentions and raise it to the highest level and use every tool that we possibly can. And I hope to do a bipartisan resolution on that.
Is Kashmir a disputed territory as to which India is required to somehow maintain the status quo? Or is the line of control, in effect, an international border where India has the right to treat it as it treats any other part of its country?
The United States regards the line of control as the de facto line of separation between India and Pakistan and Kashmir, and as a result, we recognize the de facto administration on both sides of the line of control.
But is the part that India has been administering a part of India as to which India exercises the same sovereignty and rights as any other part of India?
We don't take a position on the type of administration that is employed by either India or Pakistan.
Well, I'll recognize the gentlelady from Virginia.
They've told me of families and children who can't leave their houses, kids who can't go to school, an arthritic mother-in-law who has to go through 5 to 6 checkpoints to get to the doctor, a sister-in-law who faced life-threatening emergency and extensive blood loss and childbirth, a new wife who didn't know if she would be able to join her husband here in the United States, a fire in one home that consumed 10 because emergency services couldn't respond, a diabetic family member who can't get his insulin, and a father who died in Kashmir, and a son who was here in the States who did not immediately learn of his father's death and took days to return home after the funeral had passed. These are the stories I'm hearing from my constituents, and it's why I am deeply concerned by what you've told us here so far today.
No, thank you, and I appreciate the concerns that you raise, and we've heard these directly too in our conversations with Kashmiris and people from the region. A
member of the full committee who's not a member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from Minnesota.
And I think we have to understand the situation in Kashmir as part of an overall Hindu nationalism project of the BJP. So my first question to you is about the right of self-determination. Is the United States committed to emphasizing the centrality of Kashmir voices in determining the future of the Jammu and Kashmiri?
We absolutely believe that a Kashmiri's voice needs to be heard.
In Assam, almost 2 million people are being asked to affirmatively approve their citizenship. As my colleague and the chairman said, there have been official statements to the effect that no Buddhist, Christian, Sikh, or Jain refugees need to worry about their status. And so this is a clear anti-Muslim program. And I'm sure you've seen the same reports that the Indian government is starting to build camps in Assam, presumably to hold those who are unable to prove their citizenship. This is how the Rohingya genocide started.
And as my colleague stated, we're concerned that many of these individuals who may not have the wealth or the education to successfully be able to document their citizenship are vulnerable. We will continue to watch this very closely, but I would stress that the appeal process is still open. The judicial process is still working in India. And as a democracy, we respect other democracies' abilities to self-police and self-regulate. And so this process is underway. Our voices have been heard. Your voice is going to be heard. Obviously, there's international attention focused on this national citizenship registration.
I recognize the gentleman from Maryland.
Can you just be specific in what tools that the U.S. government is using in our wide range, our large toolbox of economic, military, information, and diplomatic tools to influence India's behavior in improving on the matters that are reported on in the Human Rights Report? I mean, I get, you know, you mentioned your deference to this democratically elected government and the existence of courts and process, but can you just be specific on what tools we're using to influence India's behavior?
We have an ongoing dialogue with the Indian government on all issues related to human rights and religious freedom.
Talk is important, and encouraging is important, but leveraging is when you have something that somebody wants and you suggest that that other person might not get it if they don't change their behavior. Are we leveraging? And if so, what's an example of a leverage?
Obviously, when we see Indian institutions, in our view, fail or respond slowly, you know, that's something we take up. But this is not a relationship of dictation. It's a relationship of partnership.
I'll recognize the gentleman from Ohio, a former chair of this subcommittee.
Thank you for holding this important hearing. Mr. Destro, Secretary Destro, relative to Kashmir, it's my understanding that political leaders are still being detained. I think this has already been addressed somewhat, but could you discuss the scope of the problem and what the Indian government is telling you as to when these individuals might be released?
Thank you, Mr. Chabot, for the question. And you know, the problem, as we've identified earlier in the hearing, is that we're not getting really good information on the ground. So I can't really give you exact numbers, especially with respect to the higher level political and business leaders. I just don't have that information.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Assistant Secretary Destro, does the State Department believe there's been human rights abuses committed in Kashmir since August 5th?
We're closely monitoring the situation. We've already expressed our concern about the lack of the ability of people to do the most basic kinds of communications with each other and with their family. The right of freedom of association is a very important one. It's enshrined in the Indian Constitution. So, too, is the right to free speech and free press. And so we've expressed our concerns about that.
My colleagues in the Senate were denied permission to visit Kashmir while on a recent Codel to India, including my friend, Senator Chris Van Hollen. Have you communicated directly, Assistant Secretary Wells, with India about their decision to block members of Congress from traveling to Kashmir? And if so, what was their response?
Yes, we advocated for the travel of Senator Van Hollen as well as for the travel of embassy officials to Srinagar, and we are disappointed that we have not had that opportunity to go there personally.
And what was India's response that he could not get into Kashmir?
The Indian government has said this is not the right time.
Seems like the right time exactly.
I agree that it would be much more advantageous for me to be able to rely on the firsthand testimony of our diplomatic colleagues.
Assistant Secretary Destro, does the State Department believe there's been human rights abuses committed in Kashmir since August 5th?
We're closely monitoring the situation. We've already expressed our concern about the lack of the ability of people to do the most basic kinds of communications with each other and with their family. The right of freedom of association is a very important one. It's enshrined in the Indian Constitution. So, too, is the right to free speech and free press.
They say they want to make sure that there are no terrorists. I've heard from many of your colleagues, there are no terrorists in our embassy that are working for the U.S. State Department. Why won't India allow American diplomats into the Kashmir Valley? Do they give you a reason?
I believe that the Indians are still taking a conservative approach to opening up the valley in particular.
The gentleman from New Jersey.
There is good reason to worry about abuse when prisoners are held incommunicado.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people need to have representation. We need to have an open system.
To what extent, in your judgment, is this motivated by genuine national security concerns on the part of the Indian government? Certainly in part, but to what extent is it that? And to what extent is this really politics?
Well, I can't speak directly to their motivation. All we can do is go by what the Indian government's doing. And so in terms of the census that they're taking, you know, that seems like a pretty bald attempt to use religion as a lever to split the society.
As we move on to the gentleman from Rhode Island.
What kind of notice did the U.S. government have with respect to this action by India in terms of revoking Article 370 Kashmir? I mean, how much notice did we have? How much preparation was done in response to that? Or how much of this was a surprise?
We were not notified or consulted.
You know, it is one thing to kind of hold ourselves up as great champions of human rights, but we, it seems to me, have a very significant responsibility to call the world's attention to this behavior and to condemn it in the strongest terms. And what are we doing?
We have spoken publicly about our concerns. We're speaking publicly here in greater detail.
One of the things that is being done in Kashmir are children. They're using some kind of pellet gun that is harming children and blinding them. And so they're now being able to say, oh, no one's died. There's been no fatalities, but they're maiming children. And then they're going around and picking up these children because they're blind. They know that they were at a protest or some. Are you familiar with this claim? Have you heard this before? If so, what are we doing about it?
Pellet guns were widely used, I believe, in 2017, but I'd have to clarify you in a question for the record, and resulted in significant casualties among people who are participating in demonstrations. There's been significant concern raised about the use of pellet guns in that fashion, and ultimately the government of India transitioned away from use of pellet guns.
But are you hearing that in this most recent set of activities that they are using pellet guns that are resulting in children in particular being blinded and then rounding up those children, taking them away, families don't know where they are?
No, I've not.
Well, will you look into this? Have you, sir?
No, we're in the same information blackout.
To what extent is this a result of the PJP and the RSS, in particular the RSS, this sort of ultra-nationalist this sort of ultra-nationalist sentiment that is really driving this effort and this assault in Kashmir?
The revocation of Article 370 has long been a mainstay of the BJP political platform. And so when Prime Minister Modi won a majority in this latest election in which 67% of Indians participated, the government moved quickly and without consultation with us to implement.
Yeah, I recognize the gentlelady from Texas.
Do you see this as a human rights, a humanitarian crisis?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's a. Yeah, Ms. Jackson-Lee, you know, from a 72,000-foot perspective, it's a crisis. To the individual families who are involved, it's a disaster.
I think my friend from Maryland was talking about Senator Van Hollen, who should have been allowed to go into Kashmir. He's born in Karachi. I believe that when American citizens, and in this instance, a member of the United States Senate or a member of the United States Congress attempts to go into an area, I think the back of the United States needs to get a little bit stronger to be able to demand that their citizens have free movement in a democratic nation. Because my question is, have you denied any reputable member of the Indian government into the United States in your knowledge? And have you denied reporters from India into the United States in any area of the United States to your present knowledge?
No.
Pakistan's military has lost their life in the fight against terror, and we should acknowledge that. And so I don't think you have a government in Pakistan that condones the idea of terrorism. Let us put that on the table, but not have it as a definition of the Pakistani people. So what is being done at the highest level of the State Department to engage, confront, and demand, if you will, an action that is responsible, that wants to ease the humanitarian crisis in Jammu and Kashmir, and to have a free flow of discussion and a resolution of this matter?
I mean, U.S. leaders have had high-level engagement ever since August 5th on the subject of Kashmir. You've heard President Trump speak publicly to his own desire to help mediate if the parties were to agree. While I share your praise for Pakistan's courage in losing over 70,000 lives, military and civilian, in the fight against those groups that were targeting the Pakistani state,
I will engage you as chair of the Pakistan caucus, but it must be a fair and balanced assessment of both countries. But right now, there's a humanitarian crisis. I'd like this government to be able to be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Human rights are being violated today in Kashmir among the Muslims and the Sikhs.
I believe that there have been human rights violations.
Troops into Kashmir, almost 800,000, I believe, for 8 million people. It's almost one troop for every 8 people. These house arrests. What protests has our government made to the Indian government for those actions?
We've spoken to the Indian government, expressed our concerns.
We value that partnership both with India and Pakistan, and they both have nuclear weapons. Why this is such a potential flashpoint, I think. And it's just not clear what this administration is doing about it.
Well, you've seen the president himself engage multiple times with Prime Ministers Khan and Modi. He's spoken publicly about his concern over the tensions that exist between the countries.
Has there been any verified cross-border terrorism?
We've observed a decline in infiltrations across the line of control, but to specific incidents, I can't comment.
We've got a situation for American citizens where when they try to get a visa from India, they're subject to special scrutiny and limitations, a whole different process, really, for getting a visa, if even their grandparent, perhaps even great-grandparent, had once been a citizen of Pakistan. That is a discrimination based on national origin. Is it our policy to push our friends to treat all Americans the same, regardless of race, religion, or national origin?
I can't comment on the administrative measures or security measures that...
Just as general policy, if some country in the world said, you know, Protestants have to go through, you know, everybody's can enter our country, but Protestants have to wait 6 months and we do a review. Wouldn't that clash with American values? Don't we stand up for all Americans being treated the same?
Of course, we want fair treatment for all Americans.
Have we urged the Indian government to treat all American citizens the same, even if they have a variety of different national origins?
I don't know the status of our...
I would, then let me put it this way. Given that it is our belief that all American citizens should be treated equally and not discriminated based on race or national origin, can I count on you to bring this up with the Indian government, that they should treat all Americans the same?
Yes.
Thank you. President Obama had declared Texas a federal territory, or if President Trump did the same to my state of California, there would be considerable resistance in the abolition. We will now hear from our private panel. The first I'll introduce is R.T. Tikko Singh.
The number of Kashmiri Muslims who have been killed in Kashmir is immense. In 2016, I was there as a journalist on the ground. We have had almost 80 youth killed in clashes with security forces. It is about right to life more than anything else. If this Congress does not understand that the right of life supersedes every other right, every other fundamental right, I don't know what to say. Thank you.
We will go on to our next witness, Natasha Kroll.
Parallels with Nazi Germany and with the Holocaust are actually very apt, because the RSS in India, and about whom concerns were raised in the morning as well, is a nationwide paramilitary that is the ideological parent of the current ruling party. And the RSS has avowedly an idea of turning India into a Hindu nation. It also has this idea of an undivided India where everything else in the region will become a part of a Hindu India. Please also remember that the New York Times in 1922 had profiled Hitler, saying that Mr. Hitler's anti-Semitism is neither as violent nor as genuine as it sounds. So things take time to unfold, and the proto-fascist trajectory that sadly the secular democracy of India is on is very worrying for us all. There is a political problem here which is compounded by human rights violations, and the international community has a role, because this has not just implications for Kashmiris who are currently under siege and under collective punishment, being deprived of their very basic rights, but it also has regional and potentially global implications. The fundamental question here is about the consent of the people. If something is being carried out for people's welfare, for their development, then why does it need tens of thousands of troops being brought in? Why does it have to happen overnight without absolutely any consultation of the people, with placing even the pro-India politicians in prison and then depriving the population of the right to say anything? If it is for their good, then why won't anyone of them be allowed to say something about it?
Our next witness is Angana Chattery.
The 2014 and 2019 elections have led to the repositioning of India as a majoritarian state. Hindu majoritarianism sanctifies India as intrinsically Hindu and marks the non-Hindu as its adversary. What is going on in Kashmir needs to be read within that landscape. If the stand of the ruling party in India is that the resolution of the Kashmir issue will be attempted through demographic changes made possible through the abrogation of Article 35A and the nullification of Article 370, many in Kashmir fear the intent of this demographic change may be culturally and potentially physically genocidal. The international community must engage in protecting the rights of Kashmiris and amplifying their voices.
We have our final regular witness, Francisco Ben Cosme.
Almost 1 year ago today, the government of India raided the office of Amnesty India for 10 hours. They ordered some of our staff to not leave, lock the gates, and not use their mobile phones. Since the raids, our funds have been frozen, forcing Amnesty India to grind its work to a halt and to downsize its staff. In Assam, more than 1.9 million people have been left out from the final list of the National Register of Citizens. Many of them have been Muslims. Amnesty International expresses deep concerns about the functioning of the 100 or more Foreigners Tribunal, which will decide whether these excluded from the NRC list are Indian citizens or not. I'm here today representing Amnesty International to ask if Congress and this administration could please speak up and loudly on behalf of human rights activists and civil society organizations who are doing on-the-ground research to uncover these human rights abuses.
Recognize the gentleman from Michigan.
It's hard for me to take seriously the argument that this is being done for the economic development of Kashmir and to unleash the... Can you or others speak to this argument? Is now tourism blossoming and so forth? I mean, this is what we're being told, right?
Yeah, it's completely unthinkable to think that you need to, in order to increase tourism, you would block all communication inside the region.
With that, we go on to the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu.
It is correct, isn't it, that the current government in India is persecuting Christians?
We've documented cases where there's been violence against Christian minorities.
Current government has intentions of essentially having India be one religion.
As a human rights organization that focuses on sort of high level of evidence, we can't speak to a government's motivation. What we have been able to document, like you mentioned, is a substantial increase of religious and sort of hate-based violence against religious minorities and other minorities.
And in fact, it's not just Christians, it's actually any religion that's not Hindu, isn't that correct?
Correct.
And essentially, the India government is blinding Kashmiris, right, with these pellet guns.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
go ahead.
May I add something else to this? Also, we've talked a lot about terrorism and infiltration today, and by the government's own admission, I've put together records from 2006 to 2019, what the state's own record has said about active militants in Jammu and Kashmir. And some years, by their own admission, it's been 1,300. Some years, it's been 300. Some years, it's been 170. Some years, it's been 450, which is a very small amount and disproportionate in relation to the army and paramilitary and police forces that are actually stationed in Kashmir.
How does the Public Safety Act contribute to inflaming tensions between the state authorities and local Kashmiris?
People we spoke to on the ground say that they're not afraid, that what they're afraid of is the Indian security forces, that they feel that many of their voices have been taken away from them. One person we spoke to feels that politics, as they know it, is now dead in Kashmir because their entire political leadership has either been detained or forced to sign away any affiliation with politics. You know, the fact that people who wanted to peacefully protest were then being either harassed or detained, I think only inflates the situation and makes it less likely to achieve their aims.
Requirement that the Indian government has people sign bondage as a condition for their release requires them to never again enter into political activities. Is that accurate?
Yes, and we've recorded in several instances of that and actually seen the sheet ourselves.
Now to go on to Ravi Batra.
It's a fair thing to say of this Congress to the Modi government. We want, as quickly as you can, restore public safety and bring transparency and restore not just 90% communication, as Assistant Secretary Wells was saying, but 100%.
I'll now ask Dr. Asif Mahmood to step forward. He was a candidate for insurance commissioner in my state of California, received more votes than any Muslim American in our history, and has been a strong advocate for Muslim Americans.
Thank you, Chairman Sherman, for your courage, wisdom, and leadership. And thank you, each and every member of this committee, from the bottom of my heart. Many of people have families in India and Kashmir. Many have businesses who are worried about losing their visa or getting their visa canceled. Many have their future and business linked to that. You must have understood by now what I mean. But we picked two witnesses who are very courageous, and they will speak truth as you heard them earlier. I'm a practicing physician, and I sit on Medical Board of California, the largest medical board in this country. I am compelled to talk about medical, physical, and mental health in this kind of circumstances. As a healthcare provider, I know when patients miss their appointments or their prescriptions, what can be devastating and dangerous effects be. And we have witnessed and we have seen the consequences in Kashmir, not just simple consequences, but deaths now. Children are not getting the vaccination, which is not only dangerous for them or their families, but for the society. Mental health issues are exponentially rising. Anxiety, panic, depression, suicidal thoughts and homicidal thoughts, and worst of them, post-traumatic stress disorder, which can last the rest of their life with them. When you take parents away from the children, or when you take children from 11 to 15 years old away 1,000 miles, that is going to make a scar on their brains. I hope this committee can listen to those concerns, and I hope this committee can come to solid resolutions which can make difference and give a light and future to those people who are under siege. And at a last note, I want to say it can be only Trump who can say welcome to Modi, who was just banned from coming to the United States a few years ago. Thank you for your time.
I want to thank the witnesses for participating. I want to thank my colleagues for participating. This is obviously an important issue, and I'm glad that our subcommittee could have hearings on it. And with that, we will adjourn the hearing. Thank you.